Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we delve into the science and practice of compassion. Today, I'm honoured to introduce a true pioneer in the field of psychology, Dr. Stephen Hayes. Dr. Hayes is Emeritus Professor of Psychology at the University of Nevada in Reno and President of the Institute for Better Health, a remarkable organisation dedicated to improving mental health and behavioural health for over 45 years. Dr. Hayes' groundbreaking work has revolutionised how we understand human behaviour and suffering. He developed contextual behavioural science, including the philosophical foundation of functional contextualism and the core science of relational frame theory, or RFT. He's also the originator of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, a transformative approach that has helped countless people worldwide live more meaningful and fulfilling lives. Beyond individual therapy, Dr. Hayes has co-developed Pro-Social, a framework for fostering cooperation within groups, and has contributed to the evolution of process-based therapy, a new vision for evidence-based intervention. His contributions have earned him numerous accolades, including the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association for Behavioural and Cognitive Therapies. With 47 books and nearly 700 scientific articles to his name, Dr. Hayes is one of the most cited psychologists globally, and his influence continues to shape the future of psychology. I'm thrilled to have him with us today to explore the intersection of compassion and psychological flexibility. And so I bring you Dr. Stephen Hayes. Dr. Stephen Hayes, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
I'm really glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. No, I really appreciate you offering me some of your time. A liberated mind, you sort of really emphasize psychological flexibility as a key there to living a meaningful life. I wonder if we could start there and just give us a sense, what is psychological flexibility?
Well, I've spent 40 years trying to kind of hack the human mind to get into the smallest set of processes that do the most good in the most areas for the most people. And we've done a pretty good job of it because we know that psychological flexibility, just the way it's normally classically presented, will handle about 55% of all the studies that have ever asked the question, not just what works, but why. And I can speak to that study and how we came to that conclusion. But lately, we've been expanding it a little bit to get from that 55% to more like 95%. And I think I can do it in a single sentence, and I can answer your question, which uh, if you learn to be more cognitively and emotionally open and come consciously into the present moment in a way that allows you to attend to what's going on in a flexible, fluid, and voluntary way. And then you use those skills to focus on what's deeply important to you, what your deepest values are, and how to put those into habits. And then if you extend that to your relationships and you take care of your body, you're doing about 95% of everything we know about how change happens and how to live an empowered life in any area you can name, from mental health to dealing with physical disease to social justice and social wellness. And that's an empirical fact. And so it's wonderful that we're there. And whether you call it ACT or not, I don't care. But learn what the processes are and figure out a way to put them in your life.
Yeah. What would that, it's a bit of a strange question, but what would that look like in a moment for a person? Like, can you give us an example of how that might actually translate or how we would observe it in someone?
Sure. If you slow down what I just said in that long sentence, there's about 8 things there where you
Mm.
need to be more flexible. And flexible means being able to vary or change in a way that fit the opportunities of the moment and that allow you to build your repertoire, build your skills, build out your life in a way that fits the values-based goals that you have. When I say values-based goals, I mean not just the short-term things of making a buck or getting likes for your YouTube channel, but what it's really about. What do you want to do with that in the sense of what brings meaning and purpose to your life in this deepest way when it's just between you and the person in the mirror? So what it looks like a life that's more flexible rather than rigid. And flexible, even in this area of flexibility itself, there's times not to be emotionally open. For example, what would an example be? Well, if you're an ambulance driver and you've got to respond to people who are on the street and some people are injured so badly that they're not going to be able to be saved and they're saying, help me, help me, help me. You're going to have to find the place in you that allows you to look towards the person over there who may not be speaking, but you can save. There's so many situations in life where you need even the rules I'm giving of being more emotionally open in the present, focused on your values, extending it to your relationships in your body. Even that, there are times when what you're doing looks like things that violate that, but they don't really, because what they're doing is giving you the skills to be in the present moment and live a life that's whole and free and is purpose driven. Peace of mind and purpose is what we are born yearning for, along with the
Mm.
little elements of it, making a difference in people's lives, being able to be yourself fully. And, if you can figure out a way to do that, no matter how much you figure out a way to do that, there's more you have to learn. And I'm
Mm.
just turned 76, and I can tell you, I'm just getting started. And probably everybody listening to me, that's true. Till your
Mm.
last breath, you'll be expanding out the territory and you'll never be finished. You're not going to get a prize at the end. There's not a blue ribbon. You're never finished, but you can get better. You can grow. And when you do, doors open up, life opens up, things happen, and you're able to take advantage of opportunities as they occur. So it's not, some sort of blue ribbon or, Goldilocks or Pollyanna. We're not talking here
Mm.
about, a magic ring or the secret or, we're just talking about you being you, fully, wholly you, and living a life worth living.
Mm.
Now, if you
I
drive into the details and you say, hey, I'm stuck, here's what well, then there's specifics because those 8 things I give you show up in a gazillion different ways to fit that moment and then that moment. And think of it like if you were playing a game. I was just watching the Cincinnati Open. I was blessed to be able to get some free tickets and watch some world-class tennis players. And they used to in sports coaching use imagery work. You'd try to groove over and over and over again how you'd respond to the opponent. They've stopped doing that in sports, at least the best coaches, and here's why. Your opponent knows it and they'll give you something you've never seen before. So what if instead we learn how to get our feet on the ground, our body centered over our feet, our eyes open, and be able to take that next ball that's coming at us over the net and be able to do something with it that fits what it is that we're trying to accomplish there. And if you say, well, what's the formula? What's it going to look like? I'd say, no, 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 be careful. Be careful. That's the part of your mind that wants to know that answer. And that evolutionarily recent part of you, that's only a few million years old, is far less wise than parts of you that are 1,000 times older. And so let's use the whole of you, including your intuition, your skill, what's grooved, your felt sense, the things that you are born to be. You've got certain things that are just part of your birthright. I mean, you're the social primate, dude. You're the one who was born yearning to cooperate and be part of a group. So get out of your own way and learn how to show up and be fully you and hit that next ball over the net.
Yeah, it's funny. The rules of psychological flexibility themselves have to be approached flexibly. It's sort of
Yeah,
interesting how you kind of said that. And
it's hard to train sometimes. When people really want to be good ACT therapists, one reason we don't certify therapists and ACT are one of the few that don't is because as soon as you do, you ossify it and you create hierarchy. And guess who's on the top? The founders. And guess how you get them off the top? You have to wait for them to die. And
mm.
so from the very beginning, no, 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 we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is try to give you measures about how good are you, but we're going to keep improving those measures so that we can let the science guide us. And just within the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've learned some things. A couple of things, if I slowed it down and said it and looked at the transcript, I'd say, Stan, that thing I said right there, 4 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. And I want to be in that position because
Mm.
that's what evidence-based journey looks like, is that let's let our knowledge about how to be there for yourselves and others And we're trying to develop skills that apply to the therapists and the change agents, but we're trying to give it away and put it into people's lives at every sort of gatekeeper function you can think of, whether it's employee training on diversity, or how you're going to be able to pass your licensing exam, or how about how you're going to be able to live up to your marriage vows, or whatever it is. Let's figure out a way to empower your journey to meet that. And it's not going to be a formula. It's not going to be, the rules. No, it's going to
Mm.
be the experiences that will dial you into the whole of you, some of which doesn't learn by rules, where rules even get in the way, so that you can get better and better, even beyond what your mind can fully understand, describe, and turn into a formula.
I guess there's something about humans where we sort of drift towards rigidity a bit. I mean, there is that notion, isn't there, of the free thinker who is then have a number of followers that turn it into a dogma kind of thing. There's a sort of a drift that happens, or it
Exactly.
seems.
Well,
Yeah.
you're mentioning, of course, the wisdom traditions, the religious traditions. Every
Yeah.
single one of them had some sort of transformational mystical experience that you could characterize in terms of psychological flexibility very easily. And now that we're doing things like psychedelic assisted therapy, where we're kind of putting people in line for that happening more frequently, it turns out it's not uncommon. Something like 95% of the population have had a spiritual experience, but they have qualities of universality, of timelessness, of deep connection, of oneness, of dissolving sense of self in any narrow sense. All of that's kind of built in, and when people have that, sometimes they come back and they want to help other people have it. And next thing you know, it's written down, and people start having religious wars about who are, kissing the ring or genuflecting to the right words. I mean, that's human behavior, because what we're trying to manage is this evolutionarily recent adaptation of human language, symbolic language, that allowed us to take over the planet as the social primates that we are in ways that are completely unlike any other life form that ever existed. And a lot of the science underneath ACT is a thing called relational frame theory, which is an active research program to understand that. But having that wonderful skill that allows us, dude, we're sitting here talking to each other. How far away are you right now?
Well, I think I must be 18,000 kilometers, is it away,
Yeah,
or
a long,
something
long,
crazy?
long way. Enough that even at the speed of electrons, there's a tiny little delay we can detect. Not much. It's pretty good tech. And we can have a conversation, record it, put it around the world in a matter, in the next couple hours, you could post it. And how, if people wanted to see it, they could. Well,
Yeah.
that was there 25 years ago. That
Mm.
wasn't fully there 15 years ago. Like what? Just look at how fast change is happening. And what is that? That's that organ between your ears. And that same organ, you're not but about 4, 5, 6 years old, that it's telling you that you're inadequate. You're not going to be good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not lovable enough. You've made mistakes. You're things you're ashamed of. If they knew you on the inside, they'd never let you be part of the group. You've got to be powerful. You've got to be confident all the time. You've got to not have any anxiety. So next thing you know, you're running from yourself. You're grasping at things, like grasping at butterflies, and they fly away. And it's the normal problem-solving mode of mind doing what it can never ever do. And so we turn our own lives into a problem to be solved. And as soon as we
Mm.
do that, part of part of what our life is going to be miserable. It's
Mm.
the single. I mean, if you had to pick, what are the two worst things you can do in all of a life in terms of being happy? And I would nominate the two: is follow rules excessively and learn how to avoid or grasp with regard to your own experiences. You do those two things, you'll be miserable. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, if you've been massively successful, if everybody applauds when you're walking inside the room, it doesn't matter one bit, because you're not going to really deep down be happy. So, what kind of a weird situation we're in, where as human beings, to be really competent and able, we're going to have to feed the very system that will turn on us and make us miserable. But if we can learn to put it on a leash and manage it, and that's what you do, it's what I do, but actually, that's what your mom was trying to do, and the advice she gave you, what our wisdom traditions are doing, our best cultural traditions, our family traditions, they're all about trying to put some of that on a leash enough that we can take a breath, show up, appreciate the sunset, and not have to say, yeah, pretty good, but it'd be better if it was a little more blue, or that cloud should be shaped differently. I mean, there's lots of places where you have a sense, an intuitive sense of don't be trying to change that, you know. You don't look at a painting and start saying, oh, that's wonderful, but you don't look at a sunset and do that. Well, how come you look at your own life and immediately you're doing that? You're brushing your teeth and you're doing that. You're like, why? What's up with that? Can you create a place where you don't have to at least do that all the time? I mean, sometimes maybe, but anyway, that's yeah,
It's an
crazy.
interesting, it's a
Hard to be human.
trade-off, isn't it? A trade-off for humans, really, because you're sort of describing, I think, what we might think of in CFT as the sort of the threat and drive kind of motives, you know, the motives for seeking safety or threat protection, the motives of acquiring or competing and those sort of things. And those kind of they really in a way benefit from rules, I guess, or a certainty of some sort, or we're trying to create knowns out of the unknowns, and all of that in a way is helpful, but in another way there's a trade-off. It just creates suffering in a sense because we do hold too tightly to it.
Yeah, sometimes strategic rules can help. I mean, if you wanted to play tennis really effectively, someone's going to tell you how to grasp the racket, you know.
Mm.
But then a lot of what they're going to arrange are learning experiences. And if you're a good coach, you don't teach tennis, if we stay on that same metaphor I stayed
Mm.
with, by hitting 100-mile-an-hour fastballs to people's backhand. I mean, you might as well just burn your money than hire that kind of a coach. You know, they may have to go all the way down like they would with kids of putting the ball on a stick, you know, so you can get your right practice. And so sometimes you have to arrange environments deliberately where you can learn stuff. And usually people don't get interested in doing that until they've failed enough times or got themselves into a cul-de-sac enough times or ruined enough relationships or hurt their own health by what they got into with addiction or whatever, you name it, you know, that they start slowing down and say, I better do a better job of this thing called learning how to be me, and do it in a way that's not just indulgent, self-focused narcissism, but real learning and challenging. You know, do that meditation retreat or try that practice, you know, read that book, etc. But
Mm.
it's not going to be a formulaic result all the way. At the very
Mm.
beginning, sure, fine, I don't mind that. Can I tell a story though? Now we're into sports metaphors.
Yeah, please.
My dad was drafted by the Cincinnati Reds, threw out his arm before he played his first game. He was a left-handed pitcher and lived his life as an athletic tragedy. You know, had a poignancy to him, a deep sadness that never got to live his boyhood dream. Could almost not get him to talk about it. He would tear up even as a grown man to talk about it. But he had to be a little embarrassed with me because I was in Little League, you know, playing baseball. I know where y'all are. You're doing cricket or something, probably
Yeah,
not American
that's true.
football, but it's kind of a similar game. And he had taken me, I was born in Philadelphia, he had taken me to see an outfielder named Richie Ashburn, who knew how to hit singles magnificently well. Just a little guy, but you know, he's in the Hall of Fame because of it, and was on the Philadelphia Phillies in 1950 when they won the championship. The Whiz Kids, they were called. So I go to see this thing, Richie Ashburn, with my dad, who's like and I'm going to learn how to hit a baseball. And he says, you know, like the best players, right before they hit the ball, they snap their wrists, and that gives you just a little bit of power. Okay, I'm there in Little League. When you snap your wrists, if you do it wrong, you roll your wrists. Snapping is not quite, and without good coaching, what it does is it lifts the bat just a little bit, enough that if you hit the ball at all, it'll be a grounder, which is almost a certain out. But 9 times out of 10, you'll miss the ball because your bat will roll up and over the ball. My batting average in Little League, my dad for a while would come to watch me. My brother was great at it. He'd have multiple home runs and stuff, but my batting average was .000. I never got one single hit in my life
Oh,
until I'm playing softball, which I'm avoiding, in graduate school. And I realized the error I was doing. And I start crushing the ball in softball because of that one rule. You know, you need to snap your wrists to hit the ball hard. And a good coach could
Mm.
have taken me out of it in minutes if they had watched it. And in slow motion, of course, athletes have all these advantages now because they have, you can play things back and you can, but it's an example, a bad rule, whatever, like, don't share your deepest secrets, dear. People won't want to be with you. I mean, listen to, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Mm.
Did you ever have an adult say that to you?
I'm not
Did
sure that I did, thankfully.
childhood? I had it in my childhood.
Mm.
Stop crying. I'll give you something to cry about. A threat of
Yes.
physical, I would have the belt. They were still doing that. They're
Yeah.
lovely parents. I mean, they were miserable, but they were lovely. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom had
Mm.
OCD. Turns
Mm.
out I only found out 5 years ago, thought she had killed her mother
Mm.
because 23andMe, I found my mother's sister's son who told me the story. At age 75, my life made sense. But
Yes.
I'll tell you that story if you want. But
Mm.
they would say things to me as a kid. You must have had hear some things like that
Mm.
that echo down through your history. That sooner or later you go like, wait a minute, that's a really bad idea. Why didn't I say stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about? I should have said stop being bothered, or I'll give you something to be bothered about. You're the freaking adult. Don't be asking me to do it. You do it. But of course, you're a kid. You don't know enough to say, hey, wait a minute. This is ridiculous. Don't say that to children. But adults do, because what it means is shut up. And then,
Mm.
of course, they're not as disturbed. But then what do they tout their kids? Suppress your emotions and their emotional and their expression so that you can be accepted in the group, including this group, calling your family, the people who love you the most.
Mm.
Okay, what lesson do you take away from that? Don't you go into other groups where they're not as close as a family? I mean, I know my mother's not going to abandon me forever if I cry, but if I really internalize that message, man, now I'm giving a talk in front of a group in class. Am I starting to sweat if I'm getting a little anxious? Yeah, because I'm about to show something that is untoward. It isn't just crying. How about fear? How about anger? You name it. I mean, pretty soon you got a long list, and almost every emotion is on the list.
Mm.
So we come
Mm.
by these problems honestly and be careful about the rules.
Yeah, the rules sometimes just get represented in fear and anger and shame. That's how they arise. The rules
And
that are held too
I
tightly.
say, each one of those emotions is important. You want to live a life without anger? Really? I get that you don't want to live a life constantly in anger. But if somebody's threatening your baby on the street, and you're going to have to confront this person, and maybe even with the best moves you got, it's going to have to be violent. It could be like that. My coach, was at the gym about an hour ago, and my coach opens up the gym. She's wonderful. She's wonderful. But she opens up the gym at about 4:30 in the morning. She gets up at 2:30, exercises herself, goes in the gym at 4:30, opens up. Well, a homeless person who we can have compassion for big time, matted hair, bugs in her hair, etc.,
Mm.
comes over and says, I'm going to kill you, and punches her in the face. She had to go into a defensive posture and say, you have to leave now, or I'm going to call the police. And she started screaming, says, you have to leave now, or I'm going to call the police. She had to hold her center, but she also had to say that if you try to hit me again, I am going to do something physically to restrain you. And so you name an emotion, you just name some where, yeah, we want a life that's relatively free of needless anxiety, sadness. But, if your mom dies, you want to be sad. You
Mm.
don't want to be like, I want to wake up in the morning and say, I want to be, but you want to be the kind of person who would weep at your mother's death, don't you? Well, if
Mm.
you give yourself a rule that sadness is bad, why would you do that? Because emotions don't work unless you have a whole range. And every emotion has a time and place.
Mm.
And the whole part of the compassionate thing is to create a space where you can witness and be with yourself as you experience difficult emotions, sensations, thoughts, illness, urges, desires, etc. Create a space where you can be whole and free and in a way that is loving and caring, the way you would with a friend. Do that to yourself and then extend it to your friends, right? So
Mm.
we used to create these measures of, well-being, and it would mean how often are you happy and how often are you sad? And I always wince. No, it's how often are you entangled with and distressed by sadness? How often are you entangled with and distressed by anxiety? There are times to be anxious, sad, angry, etc. Uh, your emotions are not your own enemy. And there are times to be happy, but don't be grabbing at it. You're a happiness junkie, you're not happy. I can show you the data on that. You cling to happiness, guess what you get? Less and less.
Unhappy. The thing I love about listening to you at the moment is you are the very embodiment of that psychological flexibility, because you'll describe certain things and then I'll reflect that a little bit, and then you'll sort of say, and also, kind of psychological flexibility is able to also, contradict ourselves even sometimes, or have that ability to see things in different ways, even though one moment we think of it in one way, then the next we're thinking of it in another way. And it just opens up, doesn't it? The
It does, and
experience.
I try to cultivate that. Although I'll tell you, I am no shining star of psychological flexibility. What I usually say to people is, check out the message, try it yourself, see what works for you. But I also say, I'm no shining star, just go ask my wife. But
Okay.
the thing I always add after that, with God love her, she's put up with me for almost 20 years. Our next anniversary would be our 20th,
Uh-huh.
is and here's the one thing, no matter how bound up and rigid I get, is when I say, yes, dear, but remember how I used to be? She always softens and gives me a little peck and says, yeah, you're getting better. She gives you, because, that's the thing. And, we're not going to get a prize at the end. No, we're going to die at the end. So, but between here and there, can we get better? I
Mm.
say, yeah, shit, yeah. I probably shouldn't be on a podcast,
Mm.
but of course we can get better. And so, can we grow? And no matter how big you get, there's more big to get. But at the edge, it's always going to look like, yeah, but it doesn't apply here. No matter how often you've done it, when it gets to that issue that's not yet fully brought in and made room for, your mind's going to tell you, no. You need to say no to that, or you need to hide that, or you need to run from that. You need to be ashamed of that. You need to feel guilty about that. You need to keep that from others.
Mm.
And sometimes you do need it to keep from others. I'm not going to tell my deep, darkest secrets, or I will to people I deeply trust. But can I create a place where at least I can visit that territory?
Mm.
Yeah, that's important. Otherwise, there's data on mindfulness. If you just do mindfulness and you open the door, sometimes people go in a negative direction, and it's not that uncommon. We have data showing it's something like 1 out of 15 people will become more and more distressed the more mindful they are, because you're opening up the doors to the basement.
Mm.
That's what's down there. Everything you shoved down there, hoping you wouldn't have to see it. So it's not going to feel happy.
Mm.
Over time, it will.
Mm.
When we did our earliest randomized trials on ACT, and we decided we would do some of the worst, the most difficult, so we did trials with chronically mentally ill, and we did trials with polysubstance abusing heroin addicts that were on methadone and still chipping, people who die under bridges. I mean, literally. I mean,
Mm.
you're at that level, or who come and sit in the clinic because it's the only place they can get warm and have a cookie to eat or whatever. And the first words out of our mouth with those folks is, we're not here to get rid of your addiction, and it's not gonna make you immediately feel happy. It more likely you're gonna feel worse. And we can help you not immediately feel good, but we can help you feel good. And you'll be on a
Mm.
different journey when you
Mm.
start having that being part of what is there for you.
Mm.
Which is, I think, a deeply compassionate message, that it's okay to start
Mm.
from here, with the hell of your own history being able to be put in front of you, instead of having to start from someplace else by being someone else. Nobody
Mm.
knows how to do that.
Mm.
So it's
I I wondered, you sort of mentioned, things like the anxiety, the anger, the sadness, they, play a very important role at times, and it's the entanglement that we're watching out for. What would you say about an emotion like shame? How would you sort of consider that in similar terms?
Shame's a tricky one because it's a combination of a judgment. Most emotions do have this. They have an intellectual side, but it also has a judgment of self. And there's that literature on guilt and shame. In most areas, guilt is actually helpful. In,
Yes.
in most areas, shame is not so much. We did the first big randomized trial ever done on shame and substance abuse. And we titled the result, which was really a magnificent result, one of those counterintuitive, you go like, wow, that's really cool. I'll explain what it is, but the title of the article, you can Google it and find it, it's been well cited, is Slow and Steady Wins the Race. Because we were working in an addiction facility where people in 28-day inpatient programs, which in Nevada, which is cowboy conservative territory, we don't pay for anybody's mental health if we can avoid it. We actually, our mental health program, seriously, at one point before we got sued by California, was giving bus tickets to people to go to Sacramento. That was our mental health
Right.
program. We just dump our mental health problems on California. And then we got sued and we had to pay a multi-million-dollar fine because, of course, you can't
Oh,
do that. Yes, that actually happened. That was our
yeah.
mental health program. Well, so we're in this 28-day inpatient program. Well, so you only get in unless you've just created an absolute freaking, mess of your life. And uh, when we looked, if you brought in our methods, which was just a group that you went to, and it's inpatient, so along with your inpatient staff, you'd have 8 sessions, I believe it was, of an hour and a half long group. So a pretty small part of your total program over 28 days. And at the end, people's shame had come down less than if you're in treatment as usual. And right out of the gate, it looked like the substance use outcomes are about the same. Then we go to follow-up. And NAC folks keep getting better and better and better and better. And the shame comes down slowly, and then it comes down and down and down and down. And the people in the 28-day program, which was built on 12-step, the shame comes down fast. And the faster it came down, the more they were hammering down drug and alcohol 6 months later.
Oh,
Because they were doing pink cloud, rosy glow. I was in a group once, and a client said, "You're trying to bring us down. You're asking us to look into the dark places. Jesus loves me, and I'm never going to use that." She was back in,
I see.
3 months later with a serious heroin addiction. You don't walk through an addiction like that, dude. You're going to walk through it one step at a time, and the 12-step programs actually say that, but then what they sometimes encourage are unhealthy quick fixes, and so we were really asking people to own up, to show up, to notice, to make room for it. But back to your issue about shame.
Mm.
So shame comes down slow, but then it keeps coming down, keeps coming down, keeps coming down, keeps coming down. Why? Because the part of that Gordian knot of shame that needs to be pulled out is this fused. It's our word for a rule or a formula that's in your head, a thought or something you heard, but you internalized it. That's bound up and bought into, secretly kind of agreed with, right? Okay. This fused belief that deep down you're not a good person. Deep down you're not lovable. You're not wanted. Deep down there's something wrong with you. You're broken. Shame has that kind of threat of inclusion in the group, which guilt gives you too. But with this other piece of like, and now that we know that you did something to violate standards, let's go the additional step of cutting yourself off at the knees and buying into the idea that you're the scum of the earth. Now go do good. Dude, so it's not just emotion. Shame is a kind of a mixture of healthy guilt and nonsense self-loathing that's bought into. I'm no good because, or deep down, I'm bad. Deep down, there's something wrong. So when you pull that part out, which part of what ACT does, and going back to the whole issue of compassion, the point of your podcast, one of the things the ACTy folks can bring to the compassionate work, and we've been on that compassion journey. We're fellow travelers. You can show that the compassion measures move with ACT. And I'm not saying everything that's in CFT and so forth is an ACT. No, it adds important things. And I would like to, and I'm actively trying to bring some of those things in. But because I'm not so interested in ACT qual ACT, I'm interested in the processes that liberate people. But that issue of how do you pull out that little strand in that Gordian knot of self-judgment that's fused, that's bought into. It turns out it's a lot easier to do that if you learn to step back and notice your thoughts with equanimity from a more spiritual sense of self. And you use some techniques that soften literal language, that reduce the dominance of this thin cortical overlay, which is only a small part of our brain. After all, it showed up only a couple million years ago. You're vastly more complex than that. But it isn't immediate. It isn't quick. You got to build those habits. And so, yeah, shame came down slowly because we weren't going to allow you to do it suppressively. That's what was happening in the control group. Shame appeared to go down, but it was going down suppressively. I'm not going to go there. Yes, you are going to go there. If you've been going there, things are going to happen. You got here with your behavior and with your addiction. When you leave here, those behaviors and those addictive patterns, maybe you're not actually using, but some of those meta patterns are still there with you. And some of the friends and some of the places and some of the habits are still there with you. You're going to walk out of this thing one step at a time, a good 12-step wisdom, right? One day at a time, one step at a time. So shame is not a clean emotion in a way. It's an amalgam. And the part of it that's not healthy and helpful is fused, I'm bad. That just cuts yourself off at the knees because, if you're starting from there's something wrong with me and I'm bad, how can the next things you do not be a reflection of that? Well, of course they will be. And you kind of know that. So you've given yourself a challenge like, now that I'm broken, how do I get fixed? And the answer is you can't. If you buy into the fact you're broken, and that's like pushing the end of game button in your video game. I mean, you've lost the game, dude. But why did you push that button in the first place? Could we kind of push back and say, wait a minute, no, you're having the thought that you're no good. If you listen closely, you might even hear mama's voice in there when she got really mad at you, or your own voice when you did something that was a deep betrayal of others, let's say. You want to know if you betrayed your friends. Clean it up. You can clean it up. Everybody makes mistakes, right? We say that. We say that to our children. How come you don't get it? And, you do exercises like confronting yourself as a young kid. And what advice would you give to yourself? If you do that carefully, people cry and give good advice. And the people I'm talking about are rapists, murderers, people in life. I mean, my first work was with people in prisons. Man, you wouldn't want them living next door. I mean, they've done stuff that is, but they're human beings and they have a capacity because they're human, right? So even with that kind of a history, never mind, most of us are not, fortunately, murderers and rapists, but we've done really, really harmful things to ourselves and others, have we not? Okay, what are you going to do with that? And every wisdom tradition has some sort of tradition of forgiveness, of open a space where you can push the reset button. And shame invites you into this mindy thing of I've got to fix me by starting somewhere else. Good luck with that.
Yeah. It's if we try to
else, I guess. I don't know. Good luck with that. Let me know. Send me a card. Let me know how it turns out.
if we try to convince ourselves out of shame, then we're kind of white knuckling it, aren't we? And then, as time passes, it bubbles back up. Whereas the slow burn is the kind of thing. And I notice you've kind of alluded. Oh,
Here's
sorry.
the thing. then you buy into the thing. Like when you're white knuckling it, you're white knuckling it because you bought into the thing that you're now trying to run from and change, which reinforces it and supports it. Now that I'm a broken, and I agree that I'm broken, I'm going to do these things so that a broken person is doing those things. How's that going to work out? So, no, you're going to have to forgive yourself, right?
Yes.
And what's that word mean? What it literally means, look at the etymology, giving yourself what went before. It's for giving, right? That's like what it means.
Mm.
The gift.
Right.
It's free. It's free. Gifts, like that. Gratis, free. Confidence, with faith. Look at the roots of our words and you can see the move you need to make. Having faith in yourself, and as a gift, giving yourself another chance, but not ignorance. You don't want ignorance. You want to know, okay, that was really, I made a mistake there. Okay, what could you do? You could do things to repair. You can do acts of repair. You can, I mean, how people who have made really bad mistakes can organize social groups to be there for others who have to face that kind of thing. There are people who come out of prisons and then work really hard as how to keep people from ever committing crimes again, or being there for people who have been harmed by violence and so forth. So our capacity for forgiveness and for living a values-based life is not harmed by our knowledge of our ability to do the exact opposite.
The quick change in shame was almost a sign that the person was still entangled with the shame, still believing I am the broken person, still fused perhaps with that notion. That the slower change, forgiveness sort of gently along the way, gradually that was more the diffusion, I suppose you might say, and letting it go.
And like that's why it wasn't surprising that woman I'm thinking of, I can still see her face in that group that I did now 20 some years ago, was right back in the facility just a few months later, because and good staffers, that's why I have a name for it, Pink Cloud, Rosy Glow, and the addictions, they've seen it before, because they've come to, sometimes they believe it. Oh, I did such a good job, and then they say, oh God, they're back again. Yeah, they're back again because of that thing that looked like a good job, wasn't really a good job. And so, but this kind of slow and steady thing, it was a metaphor that I want to use for it. It would be like, what if your life had given you, I've got some water here that I'm drinking. I'm still coming out of the gym, so I'm trying to, rehydrate a little bit. What if I'd put some salt in it and I made a mistake and I put in a little bit too much? And I go, oh man, salty. What your mind tells you to do is get the salt out, but without a method to do it. Like you're going to have the magical tweezers that reach down and take that betrayal that you did, or that lost opportunity you didn't step up to, or that harmful thing and hurtful thing you said to someone else, or that blah, 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 blah. Then it'll be, there ain't no tweezers, and there's no delete button in the nervous system that's healthy. We don't really forget, we inhibit. And short of brain injury or brain deterioration. Now, what you're going to do, if you want this thing to be drinkable and you put in so much salt, not a bad thing to have a little bit of salt in there. You ever drank distilled water? Not very tasty. Not very tasty. You want a little bit of it. I got a good idea. How about if we pour some fresh water in? We put enough fresh water in here, I don't care how salty it is, it's going to be great. Problem is, it might take you a little while. Because how are you going to do that? One kind, self-compassionate, and compassionate towards others, mindful, open, and values-based action at a time. One tiny little thing at a time. And, you could get frustrated and say, well, it's going to take so long. But it's doable, number one. And number two, you won't but have to add but a couple ounces here before you say, that's actually better. It's a little more drinkable. And that's what I say to my wife. But am I a little better, dear? She's saying, God, yeah, you are.
Yeah, you're gradually getting tastier, which is good.
Yeah, just a little bit, just enough that she feels as though she didn't make the huge mistake of saying yes to this old dog.
I've noticed you've alluded to various processes, the psychological flexibility we began with, I guess, but, mindfulness, acceptance, the sort of the diffusion sort of stuff. You just mentioned the values and so on. Where would you say compassion as an idea comes in. I suppose I don't want to fall foul of, sort of trying to make a rule or something. But yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Well, self-confidence and self-compassion, if you take those measures and you look at self-acceptance and so forth, the way we mean it, which is not tolerance or resignation, maybe it should have been a different name other than acceptance, but it's that deepest early etymological meaning of receiving as if to receive a gift. And it's still in English. If you've got a precious, so let's say grandmother's ring or something to your bride to be, you might say, "Here, will you accept this?"
Hmm.
And you do not in any way mean, will you tolerate this? Will you
Hmm.
resign yourself to this gift? No, you're saying it's so precious. I'm asking you to willingly take it.
Hmm.
And it's very rare. We don't do it very often, but when you do it, it's heartfelt, right? Well, we mean acceptance that way of taking the gift of feeling, of remembering. Because why? Because it's the gift of where our wisdom comes from. Without our history, who would we be? Without those mistakes, who would you be? You think about the most important things in your life, you've got some sad memories in there. They're the most important, they're the most pivotal. You think about the things you learned from the most, you've got some things in there that are probably mistakes you made. It's not all flowers and perfume. No, okay. So, but it's precious, isn't it? Because it means you have the capacity to learn and get better, to get wiser, to have life open up. So, uh, here. So if you take a measure of acceptance, and we try to word those items that way, and then you look at self-compassion measures, let's say, they'll correlate in the mid sevens, which
Hmm.
is so high that sometimes people say, maybe this is the same concept. Now, I don't think it's exactly the same concept. I think that compassion, especially some of the better measures and ways of thinking about it, we've looked at all the compassion measures that are out there, and there's a lot of different ones out there. And same thing with mindful measures. People move around with what they mean by it. But it includes also, certainly Paul's work would include this intentionality towards others, right? Scaling it socially. And if there's a part in the ACT model as it started that was weakest, it was there because it was a full psychological model. And the social side came out more with values, but without much guidance in terms of relationships. One reason why we didn't have much guidance is that we were cautious about having a formula there,
Hmm.
because if you touch these deepest areas, there's a wing of work in positive psychology and so forth that have taken the step to actually say, and here's what the different values options are, and here's what the virtues are. That is a massive mistake, massive. Because then you go into indigenous peoples in Canada, and guess what? They have 7 different concepts that are built into their concept of values. And when you have it explained, you it's really hard to understand. You really have to work to learn it because it's a completely different culture. So don't be going out there saying the weird world's view of, you know, Anglo-Protestant values. Come on, just shut up. Ask people what
Hmm.
is deeply of importance to them and then listen really carefully. Okay. So, uh, I think the compassion work includes this quality of the social primates yearning for belonging, connection, and well-being of others because of the kind of primates we are. And then I got to, and so if I look at the psychological flexibility, I say, what adds to it? Well, I gave you an example earlier of some of our diffusion skills with regard to sense of self. I think we're pretty good on experiential avoidance and emotion opening up. I think compassion focused treatments are really good about that. They're not necessarily as good, and we weren't either, but we're getting better at it about watching out for attachment. It's in the wisdom traditions, especially Eastern ones, but you can easily get grabby. I mean, there is such a thing as pathological altruism.
Hmm.
There is. You can go hard on the compassion towards others, so hard you're ignoring your family, your own health, your community. You're doing things that are actively harmful to yourself in the service of what? You die an early death, you're not going to be around to be able to do those good things you're doing there, dude. Are you sure that's really where you want to play it? So, when you start thinking more broadly of being more open, aware, and actively engaged, in a values-based life, extending it to your relationships and taking care of your body, which is the shorter sentence for the longer sentence I said earlier.
Mm.
It includes all the things, but without as much detail. When you do that, if you come into compassion and self-compassion, or you come into compassion towards others, you better look at the whole system. And here, let me just give you a little bit of data that I can go very geeky very fast, but is there a
Okay.
space where I can do a little data description
Absolutely.
that won't lose the audience? Most of the things that we know about, where we have categories for things that are tested scientifically, were tested using group categorical methods, bell curves and standard deviations, randomized trials. What are those? Variability between persons are used to define the latent variable. It's called psychometrics.
Mm.
And variability between persons are used to define a rubber ruler that allows you to evaluate whether or not, if you did something, if you moved that whole group. You don't mean the intact group, you mean a collection, okay? Randomized controlled trials. Here's the problem. Statistically, you cannot go from the behavior of a collective in a bell curve. Everybody thinks you can, but you cannot. It's impossible. To what you should do for a particular person longitudinally over time.
Mm.
Now, I've been on a journey over the last 10 years to really deal. I told you, I want to get the smallest set of things, hack the mind, get the smallest set of things, do the most good in most people in most areas. And I can get it down to learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a life worth living, extend your relationships, take care of your body, drop a period. That accounts for 95% of everything. We know that's pretty good. Yeah, but how does that apply to a particular individual? And we discovered about 4 years ago that it only does if I look at variability not between people, but within you over time. And what lifts you up or pushes you down, and then put that into a dynamic network, because many things have to go simultaneously. So if you just, let's say you do compassion work, but you still have not really reined in rule governed stuff, excessive judgment, entanglement with thoughts, or a sense of self that's categorical, or you haven't really dialed into the difference between goals and values, or you haven't really managed your attention in such a way that it can be flexible, fluid, and voluntary. That self-compassion move can blow up on you. So let me give you a concrete warning and landing. We take measures of self-compassion. We take measures of compassion towards others. We do it, let's say, once a day or twice a day, and we do it for a couple months. And then we do it with hundreds of people. And then one at a time, we ask the question, during the times that you're kinder and softer with yourself, does that lead to or empower or lift up your capacity to be kind and caring about the suffering and emotions and feelings of others? Compassion towards yourself, compassion towards others, right? We know, and you probably have it in your head, and I bet you half of your audience knows, that in general, they correlate. And in treatments, when you intervene on self-compassion, you get more compassion. When you intervene in compassion, you get more self-compassion. This thing looks like it's a system. It has two features. It all works together. They correlate like 0.4, 0.45. Almost no exceptions. Every single study, great. We've got the answer. Everybody needs it. Wait a minute, dude. Let's go one person at a time. Now look at each, model that relationship, one person at a time. And here's the horrifying answer. 1 out of 8, 1 out of 10 people, the nicer they are to themselves, the meaner and nastier they are to others. And you know people like this. The research says they don't exist. Yes, they do, but the research was doing it the wrong way, and I can explain what that is, maybe in a way that even normal folks who aren't researchers would understand. But before I do that, let's just say, you know people like this. You've heard somebody say, you take care of the kids. I got to go meditate. I need my self-care time, in a way that was selfish. I have no doubt every single person has seen people use the language of self-care and self-compassion to do selfish things. Now, if you're on a retreat Or if you're in a wisdom tradition thing, a good monk or whatever would say, I think I'm going to ask you to do the dishes. Because they're not going to let you get away with that. Because they know that's not healthy, right? And it's in our wisdom traditions. Right action, values-based action is built in with mindfulness and compassion. You don't just put passion out there in the world. You need the whole package, right? Yeah, but psychological flexibility gives you a sense of what that package is. Number one, you don't necessarily have to go to a retreat or a wisdom teacher necessarily. Nothing wrong with that. That's the main way to do it, but it's not for everybody. And there's lots of people working on the factory floor who are never going to do a 10-day silent retreat. This is not going to happen. And so if we want to get into the world, we need to get in the world the way it is. Well, so now we've started, and this is only the last 2 years. I'm going to give a little talk on this to the Global Compassion Coalition on the 29th of August. I think
Right.
at my time, I think it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm Pacific time. So do the math.
Mhm.
Me and Rick Hansen are going to have a conversation. I'm going to share a little bit of these data. When we then take the people for whom be kind to yourself goes with negativity towards others, and we slow it down, begin to look at what's going on there, we see many different things. Sometimes people don't have the real emotional openness they need, or they're still entangled with judgment, or they're bought into a conceptual sense of self, or like, I deserve it, I'm entitled to my self-care, there's some little thing that hooked them. Or they've sort of forgotten the larger set of values in which compassion fits, or they've not learned how to build habits that really put this into your life in this kind of more atomic habits kind of way, one step at a time. So my message to people listening is the whole psychological flexibility model brings some additional things that will support and lift up your own self-compassion and compassion towards others. And the new material that's brought in by compassion-focused therapy and so forth has an easy place that fits there. You don't have to check your concept at the door. You don't have to become ACT people to do it. We don't care about any of that. And now that we've learned that processes of change aren't predicted by our traditional stats, we've developed stats that allow us to look one person or one couple or one family at a time before we draw generalizations. And when we've done that, we've discovered that we're missing things, number one. Number two, and this is a real horror, but most of your audience wouldn't care, that statisticians who've known from the beginning of a long, long time that the mean, the average doesn't represent the individual, have dealt with ways to get around that. And I could show you images that will show by doing that, they've made it worse, far worse. What they've done is they've come up with statistical methods that now so hide the outliers in the name of finding an underlying single model that will fit all people, that they will not even allow you to see self or self-compassion. It disappears. It's gone. It's not in the data. That's a horror, because that means now our studies come out and they say, really, trust me, just be kind to yourself, be kind to others, without understanding. No, there's not any process, including everyone that I talked about, values, acceptance, and all of those, that frankly, we started at the beginning. You can see I had this warning. There is no process that doesn't sometimes go awry, and they fit as a part of a whole network. And you can only unpack that it's wrong to say one person at a time. You can only unpack that by understanding the particular before you get to the general, instead of, we're going to just talk about the general and that'll apply to the particular. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And there is a wing of statistics in physics that 150 years ago knew this, and 100 years ago proved it mathematically, and we only woke up to it just 20 years ago, when one guy discovered and said, hey, wait a minute, the ergodic theorem, which is the geeky name for it, don't try to remember it, says that doing what we've been trying to do with our randomized trials can't be done. It's a wrong use case. Fine to do randomized trials, but they don't tell you what to do with this particular person, couple, family. They don't. They can't. It's mathematically impossible. And I would have to do a geekier thing to explain that. But me and my colleagues are now vigorously on a hunt, and it's every week we sort of feel the ground tremble because we realize a lot of the stuff we thought was certain and settled is not. And we're going to have to, as a whole community, learn how to empower people where they are. And the wonderful message about that is through AI methods and things like that, we can actually do it now. We couldn't have done it 150 years ago. It'd be impossible. Or even 50 years ago, but we can do it now. And so we'll see. I'm pretty excited about what the next 5 years are going to show.
It's a seismic shift in a way, isn't it? Because ACT, of course, has a really large evidence base based on RCTs and all the rest of it, and
We
so
have
it's interesting.
1,200 randomized trials up on the website, and there's another
Yes.
150 that is about to, a lot of them for lower middle income countries, because we've done so much to try to get it into the, and so you're right, a
Which is
massive.
all, it's all still good stuff, isn't it? It's just, I was pondering that idea of how we tend to delete outliers in statistical research, and just what that sort of means, given, and I was thinking too that there's also the case for the person who's very compassionate towards others, but is not necessarily self-compassionate at all, that in both directions.
In both directions, you can have pathological altruism, you can have selfish self-compassion, and you can have disconnects. We just published a thing we called the compassion balance that looked into places when they get out of sync, and they go in both directions in terms of out of sync. And we applied it to couples and showed that, when you have a mismatch like that, you can have it even in the couples, and it predicts negative outcomes, as you could expect, at the level of the couple. And so and the other exciting thing about that, I won't be able to unpack this because we just don't have time and it's a little geeky, but by going in one particular person, couple, whatever at a time, we have now found some hidden subgroups that were completely invisible. And they're unusual. I mean, they're like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 12, but a significant portion of folks who are very different than other folks. And so we're beginning to see that what's going to happen when we really get in when we embrace particularity, practicality will show up, because it's not one size fits all. And if we have to end up with, okay, everybody's unique and we're just going to have to model you as an individual, at least that we can learn how to do fast with AI tools. And so I have an app, for example, in my 501c3 charitable organization that I'm president of, called the Institute for Better Health. It's been around for almost 50 years. I don't get any money from this. I just give money to them. IBH, if you go to ibh.com, you can find a little bit about what we're doing that will allow people to measure over time, therapists right now, but it'll eventually be available to anybody, and then to model it into a network so that it can say, really what you especially need to break out of this is you need this. And then we've linked it up to a couple of apps, one that I don't have any interest in, one COI warning I actually do have an interest in, called PsychFlex. You can go to psychflex.com and find out about it. That will allow, when you say you need this particular thing, to send nudges and bumps, little tiny kernels, 1 minute long, 3 minute long, that will help just with that. It's kind of like untying a knot, where if we can say, grab right there and pull a little bit. And if you've ever done a knot, sometimes the tiniest little bit of pull in the right place, the whole thing starts unraveling. And you can open up that present, or, be able to deal with that boat that you want to use the rope again, rather than have to throw it away because it's so tied up, or whatever the thing is. The same thing with our lives, I think. I can't say with certainty right now that the outcomes will be better when we do this, but I can say with certainty right now, the outcomes we've been getting based on big normative categorical randomized controlled trials have not improved the human condition over the last 40 years, in the sense of any of the major areas where you pick something and say, boy, we really need this, that the overall effect sizes have gone up. Pick a struggle with anxiety. I defy you to find the meta-analysis, the analyzing all studies at once, that says we're getting better outcomes. We're not. It's flat or falling. So
Yes.
needs
Sort
to
of
be different.
makes you makes us feel a bit twitchy, doesn't it? The idea that all this work and effort and those aren't necessarily changing. So there's sort of, what is it? You're on the hunt, I guess, as you said a moment ago.
And I think what we're doing is good. And if
Hmm.
you compare what we do, if we weren't guided by science at all, we can do better.
Hmm.
But then we can show that that's what they do in the controlled studies. I mean, also, if you have a well-crafted control group, we can show that just doing what you feel like, or don't doing anything, or put people on a wait list, or having read some sort of not, yeah, we're better than that.
Hmm.
But the effect sizes relative to that are flat or falling because the culture is changing fast. Your kids are nothing like you, dude. Nothing. Talk to them. They've lived in a completely different world. And it's distressing as hell for them sometimes. They know about global warming. They know
Hmm.
what's happened to climate. They know what's happened to immigration. They know about economic disparities. They play games with people all around the world. And my son, can tell you what the time is in Australia, Europe,
Hmm.
and here at any one moment of any day because he plays Minecraft with them all or whatever. I just took him and dumped him off at Purdue because he's doing a major in game design and
Oh.
science, and he's only been there 2 weeks, and we're empty nesters now. But after 55 years with kids in the home, which set a world record, I have nobody living in the home except my wife and I and our doggy walk. But my point being that it isn't that
Things
our
change.
methods have gotten worse; it's that our needs have gotten greater. And we have to learn how to move a lot faster to create modern minds for this modern world. And I think compassion is a big part of it because when
Hmm.
you're exposed to the entire world, you see suffering,
Hmm.
and suffering diminishes us all. Suffering in anybody diminishes all of us. We're
Hmm.
biologically prepared to have that happen. And then there's a little switch we can throw where we say, I don't give an F. And then
Hmm.
next thing you know, you got people standing in front of school buses with immigrant kids shrieking at them, get out, to 5-year-olds, which actually happened
Hmm.
in Arizona here just a few years ago. If you think about what is in the adult mind that people would take out their time to drive to shout at children in a school bus to get out and go
Hmm.
home. I mean, how?
A lot of
But I
suffering.
understand what it is. What it is that I know we're late, but can I say one
Hmm.
little thing that might
Hmm.
be of use to our audience? We did some studies on what reduces prejudice, what reduces stigma, what softens the human heart. And we found a little triad of things. In order to be able to be compassionate towards others, you need to be able to take the perspective of the other person.
Hmm.
You need to feel what it feels like to be that other person. And you have to not run away when it's hard.
Hmm.
Those three things had to hang out together. We called it the flexible connectedness model. And it predicts prejudice in any area that you want to name, including what we call polyprejudice, which is the variable that's inside all of our prejudice, which is this authoritarian distancing, up and away. I'm better, I'm different, and arm out, hand up, keep you away from me, right? It was in the hearts of those mostly men screaming at
Hmm.
brown children in a
Hmm.
school bus some years ago.
Hmm.
Well, here's the problem. This is the cultural challenge that we face, Stan.
Hmm.
Camera can give you perspective taking. You could see the bloated body of that 3-year-old who drowned from the Syrian refugees trying to make it to Greece. You
Oh,
can
yes.
see the camera can give you a cheap thrill version of empathy. It'll do a close up of the mother's tears as she looks at her boy, that drowned boy on the beach. This is some years ago, but you remember that
Yes.
image?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the camera cannot open up your heart in such a way that you can carry that suffering. And
Hmm.
there's an easy out for you, which is no, that doesn't apply to me. That's
Hmm.
your fault. You're different. I don't care about you. You do that little social primate thing of us and them, and you make
Us and
them the dehumanized other.
Mm,
Next thing you know, you're standing in front of a school bus full of brown 5-year-olds and
mm,
screaming, get out, go
mm,
home,
mm,
to children who have no place to go. Yeah.
mm.
So,
Those three sound a lot too like part of the compassionate mind, the idea of empathy, sympathy, and distress tolerance, I guess, the
yeah,
empathizing with the other person and their feelings, feeling moved by what they're going through, but able to kind of tolerate some of the distress that might arise, as you do
open
that.
up to, learn from, even tolerate sounds a little bit, but open up to,
Mm,
learn from,
yeah.
feel, because it'll help you at other times when it's your own suffering you're being asked to witness and feel.
Mm,
Now, so I think the compassion work that we're doing, and the
mm,
ACT
mm,
groups are part of this same family of interventions. We move compassion. Our outcomes are mediated by compassion. Our measures correlate with the measures there. But there's new things in there. I'm not saying at all
mm,
that the kind of stuff Paul is doing, or Rick, or all these wonderful,
mm.
wonderful people
Yes.
are already being done. I'm absolutely not saying that. We're learning, and we're learning together, and we're fellow travelers.
Yes.
But I am saying this, and maybe this would be a good place to close and end,
Yes.
is the challenge for everybody listening to this conversation is how to put some of these processes into your own heart and head and hands, but also into the hearts and heads and hands of those around you, and create a kind of a wave that moves through the culture worldwide, that allows us to live in this modern world where if suffering is happening anywhere, it can be on your iPhone in minutes, and in which judgment and hate and will travel around the world at the same speed of electrons, and that there is no other Earth for us to move to, and
Mm,
everybody has a stake in the psychological, social, and physical health of everybody. So we're going to
mm.
have to find a way to, as the tribal primates, to have the tribe be all of us.
All of us.
And that's
Yes.
going to take some learning and some
Mm,
cultural change. But I think we're going to get there. I'm betting on human beings. I'm betting we can get to a place and get there fast with the help of science and the help of caring people around the world, where every voice matters, and the things we've been talking about are put in a way that fits their cultures, their traditions. I'm not talking about putting Western European ideas everywhere. I'm talking about listening as much as speaking, despite the fact that I've spoken so much. Uh, uh,
yeah.
Everywhere. And let's see what we could do if that combination of science and the deep wisdom that's in our wisdom traditions are now put into the world in a different way. Let's
Mm,
find out. Is there enough
yeah.
love in the world to solve these problems? Let's find out.
Yes. Yes, there is. There is. Well, no, I do think that's a really wonderful place to bring our conversation to an end. I must say your enthusiasm is infectious, and your wisdom is inspiring, and the idea of this process-based, sort of understanding the individual. I mean, I think that is, that's absolutely where we're heading. I will put some of the you mentioned a few papers. You mentioned some links. I'll keep those. I'll put those in the description. Not least your website, where I think there's lots of those links to be found, and so on. And yeah, Dr. Stephen Hayes, thank you very much for being on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Well, thank you so much, Stan. And I hope that I've drawn a few things on the t-shirt that might be relevant to people.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you
Thanks, my
very much.